I would like to start our March Tea Party. So good afternoon, dear friends and supporters of the United Nations Delegations Women's Club. Today, the United Nations Delegations Women's Club and our UNDWC March Tea Party would like to underline one very specific month. March is Women's Month, and throughout this month, countries all around the world celebrate women's contribution to history, culture, and society. Nowadays, women and girls are the powers and pillars for development of their countries. The role, rights, and responsibilities of women for social, economic, educational, and national development of a community are of the greatest importance. Unfortunately, the pandemic has hit women the hardest. Women have lost the bulk of their jobs. Women have experienced an increase of violence. Girls are losing their education. They are dropping out of school. The threat is that 11 million girls may not go back to school ever. It is something that should worry us. Girls are being forced into early marriage at this time, and girls are being trafficked. March 2021 is also the month of the 65th session of the United Nations Commissions on the Status of Women, which is about to end today. So today is a special day because this special UN Commission on Status of Women is ending. Its priority theme is women's full and effective participation and decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. The Commission reaffirms that the promotion and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms of all women and girls, including the right to development, which is universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated, are crucial for women's economic empowerment and should be mainstreamed into all policies and programs aimed at the eradication of poverty and women's economic empowerment. The Commission also affirms that urgent consideration should be given to the promotion, protection, and full realization of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. Dear friends, UNDWC is hosting cultural events which promote unity and solidarity, and it welcomes all nationalities, no matter which corner of Earth you are from. Our club is a great social venue for better understanding of the various cultures presented in the United Nations. Our events are well known for being educational and intercultural. Today, United Nations Delegations Women's Club is extremely excited that it can proudly host a woman whose work has been recognized internationally by the Association of Art Museum Curators as the work which is instrumental in rethinking the history of sub-Saharan African art and culture. I would like to welcome Dr. Alisa LaGamma, the curator in charge of the Rockefeller Wing, known as the Wing of the Arts of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas of Metropolitan Museum of Art. Dr. LaGamma will introduce us.
Thank you, Anne.
Yes, so please big clap to Dr. LaGamma. Dr. LaGamma will introduce us to the part of Africa called Sahel, which she knows very well as she used to live there. The story which was happening in the Sahel centuries ago defines the story of Sahel, which is on display in the Metropolitan Museum today. As the New York Times underlines, the story here is variety within variety, difference talking to difference. New ideas spring from local soil and arrive from afar. Ethnicities and ideologies both collide and embrace. cultural influences get swept, dropped, and recoped in multi-track sequencing that is the very definition of history. The culture, evolution, and history of women who were born, live, and are from the continent of Africa reflect the evolution and history of the African continent itself. It is also my great pleasure for me to express our deep gratitude to another woman of Africa. I would like to say big thank you to a dear member of our executive board, Ms. Tina Conjul, spouse of the permanent representative of Republic of Mauritius to the United Nations. We very much appreciate your efforts and time that you have invested into the preparation of this United Nations delegations event. And now, dear Tina, thank you very much, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you so much, Andrea. A warm welcome to you all. And thank you for joining us today, especially with 3 major holidays coming up. Very happy Passover, happy Holy, and happy Easter. And I guess the spring break begins right now. As of now, I'd like to thank all my sisters from the United Nations African Ambassadors Women's Club for being here today, and especially Mrs. Evelyn Tiare, the spouse of the permanent representative of Burkina Faso, who is my partner in crime, my African partner in crime on the UNDWC board. It's with great pleasure that I introduce our guest today. Dr. Alisa LaGamma is the C.L. and Michael E. Pulitzer Curator in Charge, Arts of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Alisa is the daughter of a diplomat, so she knows us well. And she was born in Lubumbashi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and spent her formative years in sub-Saharan Africa, including 3 years in Dakar, Senegal. Graduate studies in African art history at Columbia University led her to undertake research in southern Gabon. Her subject, the living tradition of Buhu Mask, which culminated in her 1995 dissertation, The Art of the Pumu Mekuje Masquerade, Portraits of an Equatorial Society. The Mekuje masks are the female masks, and I think one recently just sold for about $400,000, so they're quite valuable. Alisa has been a curator at the Met since 1996, and her exhibition projects are devoted to topics ranging from authorship to portraiture, and have sought to anchor African art historically and conceptually. In 2010, she was a fellow at the Center for Curatorial Studies, and in 2012, the Bard Graduate Center recognized her work with the Iris Award for Outstanding Scholarship. The most recent of her many critically acclaimed exhibition projects, Sahel, Art and Empires on the Shores of the Sahara, opened at the Met in January 2020, and was the culmination of many years of collaboration with colleagues in Mali, Senegal, Niger, and Mauritania, and contained over 200 pieces of artwork. So that in itself is quite an accomplishment to put it all together in one place. Alisa is recovering from a quite serious accident, and we are so grateful that she is here with us today to commemorate International Women's Month by generously putting together and sharing with us her work on female power in the visual culture of Sahel. Alisa, welcome to the UNDWC March Tea Party.
Thank you so much, Tina, for this invitation. I'm so honored to be joining all of you. As we said earlier, I'm sorry that it's virtually rather than in person, but we'll remedy that in the future. I'm going to share my screen with all of you. And just to give you a little bit of background, when Tina and Andrea and I spoke about what a fitting topic for today's session might be, we decided that the recent celebration of the Western Sahel as a great cradle of civilization and its representations and
Do you want your
creation.
sandwich?
No, go ahead.
Okay, everybody can hear me fine?
Yes.
If I can ask you ladies, just the technical issue, if you can mute yourself right now. If I can ask you to mute yourself, everybody please mute yourself so we can hear properly the presentation by Alisa. Thank you.
So we decided that the exhibition project that was a collaboration between me and my counterparts in the major national museums of the Western Sahel, and the representations of women and their creations would be the focus of what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Now, I'm so glad that Rakia is with us because Niger was a very special partner in this endeavor. And as she well knows, the Sahel is the term that was selected all the way back in the 7th century to describe the expanse of land that extends from the Atlantic Ocean on the coast of present-day Dakar all the way to the Niger River in the interior of the continent, directly south of the Sahara Desert. And this term actually means shore, because when the Arab traders who began to make journeys from North Africa across the expanse of the Sahara, initially introduced those voyages from North Africa into the interior of the continent, they conceived of the Sahara Desert as a vast ocean of sand. And their arrival at the end of that journey in present-day Niger and Mali was like disembarking from a ship and arriving on the shore of a great ocean. So that's what Sahel means. And this was a great cradle of civilization even before trans-Saharan trade began at the end of the 7th century. And it was the site for the development of a series of formidable states that are very famous in world history. The ancient empire of Ghana that extended from circa 300 to 1200, the ancient Mali Empire that arose circa 1230 and ended around 1600, the great Songhai Empire that extended from 1464 to 1591, and the Bamana Segu Empire that arose circa 1712 and came to an end in 1861. So in the Sahel exhibition, we essentially traced this history of the rise and fall and the succession of these mighty states and illustrated their cultural significance with the evidence of great works of art, many of them which continue to be the centerpieces of national museums in the region. Now, to begin with, so here is a map of the region that we covered in the exhibition. And you can see that it extends from Senegal to Niger, directly south of the Sahara. And highlighted are some of these great empires that arose over time. And here on the screen is the earliest work of art in a art museum or in a museum that we know from this region. It actually was found in 1966 in Senegal, and it is in the collection of the Ifan Museum in Dakar. And what it is on this screen, it looks like a stone monument, but it's really a pebble. It's an intimate pebble that you could hold in the palm of your hand. It's several thousand years old, and it's a vestige of the earliest settlers of the Sahel who were pastoralists, who lived in this region for thousands of years and were very mobile in their lifestyle. They were constantly moving from place to place. And these pastoralist settlers accrued wealth and power in the form of cattle and semi-precious stones. And at the end of their lifetimes, they erected monuments in the form of mounds that actually resemble natural features of the landscape. You might just come upon them. There are thousands and thousands of them in Senegal and in Mali, and assume that it is just a small hill. But these were actually man-made commemorative monuments where people deposited precious possessions. And here we have a stone that was once the precious possession of one of these settlers that was found in association with a mound in Senegal. And what's fascinating about it is that its original owner made a very modest intervention in the form of the stone. He saw in it a human representation, and just by adding a few lines, transformed it into a work of sculpture that is a tribute to procreation. And you can see that it becomes a symbolic reference to a torso that has both male and female attributes associated. It probably was an article of faith that enhanced the procreation of members of the human community in which it was owned. So here we see in a very early work from an ancient settler, the very beginnings of representation from this region. I also want to point out this incredibly important work, which is in the National Museum of Niger. This is a woman's tunic that dates from the 8th century. It is literally the oldest example of a textile from sub-Saharan Africa that we know. It was excavated by archaeologists north of Niamey. And you can see that it's in very fragile condition. We traveled it from Niamey and did some restoration on it for the exhibition. But it was buried with its owner as a very precious article of hers when she passed into the afterlife. And so here we see an example of very early weaving traditions. This is a garment that is very sophisticated, woven textile that combines cotton and wool and very complex dyes. Now, I had mentioned that the earliest of the great states that arose in the Sahel was that of ancient Ghana. And the tunic that I just showed you and these vessels are contemporaneous with the with this very celebrated power early on in Sahelian history. And this series of vessels, like the tunic that we just saw, were part of the attributes of a particular individual who was buried in a ceremonial mound in what is present day Mali. Throughout this region, the practice of continuing to bury important individuals with precious objects that they had valued during the course of their lifetime, and also things that would support them in the afterlife, continued throughout the centuries. And here, this series of vessels are the kinds of vessels that even in contemporary Mali, people use to store water and to store grains, and to prepare meals. So even though they date to an 8th century burial, forms that continue to the present very relevant in our own day. Now, one of the reasons why these vessels are interesting is not only that continuity, but
Sorry, Alisa. Jessica, can I please ask you to mute yourself? Sorry to interrupt you, Alisa. Sorry, my apologies. Jessica, can you please mute yourself? Thank you.
So these vessels are beautiful, they look contemporary, and they also are a form of material creation that is the purview of women in contemporary Mali, and likely all the way back to the period when these examples were created. Okay, so I'll keep on going. So
oh my goodness.
Even though this work was created in the 6th century, when archaeologists uncovered it, they found it in a context that dated to the 11th century. So this seems to have been something that was a cherished, venerated artifact at the center of practices of veneration for centuries before it was discarded in the 11th century, which is the period in which leaders of these powerful states embrace and adopt Islam as their official faiths. So this is a very interesting example of a change that is happening in this region with the over many centuries of trans-Saharan trade, the arrival of Islam, and the eventual embrace of it as one of the major faiths that is practiced across this region today. And interestingly, the site that this discarded female figure was found in was that of a ancient mosque. So we see the discarding of some practices and the development of new ones to replace them. In any event, I had mentioned that clay, creating in clay is the prerogative of women. And in this region of the Western Sahel, we have in the after the ancient empire of Ghana, we have the a succeeding state, that of ancient Mali, that sponsored an explosion of representations in fired clay for ancestral altars. And we have a very interesting example of this on the left of the screen, this very famous reclining male figure, which is a centerpiece of the National Museum in Mali, in Bamako. And this reclining figure is a work that archaeologists Rod and Susan McIntosh found at a site known as Ancient Djenné in the 1980s. And it too was an incredibly precious work, a work that a great deal of creative energy was invested in by its patron and the artist who produced it, but was eventually discarded. The Macintoshes excavated this work as a fragment, and it seems like it was deliberately decapitated at the end of its life, at the time when the emperors of Mali too embraced and converted to Islam. So once again, sculpture from this region gives us an understanding of change, major changes that were introduced in the spiritual lives of people across this region over time. One of the interesting things to consider is that the fired clay that these sculptures were shaped from is the same adobe that is the material used to create architectural monuments across the Sahel. We refer to this adobe in the region as banco, literally mud, and it is fashioned into sun-dried bricks and harnessed to give shape to structures ranging from humble granaries to grandiose mosques. And what you see on the screen here is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the largest banco structure in the world, the largest adobe structure in the world, the Great Mosque at Djenné. And these structures in banco are semi-permanent in nature. They're buildings that inexorably melt during seasonal rains and require resurfacing on an annual basis. And that resurfacing is a civic event that brings together the entire community, from children to women to professional masons. It is a process that is very special, that makes these living buildings, ones that are continually reshaped with each new generation. So over time, as I intimated, we have the celebration of the arrival of Islam, but we also have the continuation of ancestral veneration in this region. The Great Mosque at Djenné is a monument that was first built around the same time as this sculpture that is today in the Dapper Foundation's collection in Paris. This is a work that was created right next door to Djenné in the Bandiagara escarpment around the beginning of the 16th century. And it's a very abstract work carved from wood. It essentially is a two-sided silhouette. And this very minimalistic representation on the front of a human presence with raised arms is a gesture of prayer, a prayer for new life and a prayer for rain. Because as you doubtless know, this is an incredibly arid region, and the arrival of the rains is something that is really a life and death matter for the population that very gracefully manages to sustain itself in very challenging climatic circumstances.
You're not supposed to drink with
Now, I'm showing you both sides of this sculpture. The front is the figure with arms raised, and the back is a miniature figure echoing that gesture. It's almost as if the front of the figure is a mother, the back is her carrying a miniature figure, and she becomes the cosmos that sustains this miniature representation of human life. This sculpture's very uneven surface is a record of the application of offerings of millet porridge,
know
which
if
is
it
the
might be
staple
appropriate
of life
recommend not drinking.
in this region. And the sculpture literally was fed
Yeah,
offerings
leprosy.
along with the articulation of prayers for rain and for the arrival of new life to expand the community. And here you see an example of another work from around the same period, produced in the same area of Mali, of a mother and child. Here, the woman is feeding her child, and the sculpture is literally a work positioned once again on an altar. And it is a prayer by the family that commissioned it for children to come in to this extended family, and to be expanding the extended family. I want to close the chronology of what we've been looking at with this series of figures also from Mali, associated with the great state of Ségou, which is north of Bamako. At the Ségou court, traditional priests officiated over rites concerned with farming, hunting, and war. And while they tolerated Islam, they continued to practice their traditional faiths and were considered a stronghold of those beliefs until they were conquered in 1864 by the jihadist leader El Hajj Umar Tal. And on the left, you see a photograph from the end of the 19th century of the city of Ségou. You can see structures made out of that adobe banco that I was just talking about. And on the right, you see a whole series of figures that were produced as a celebration of ideals of leadership and values celebrated by Ségou's elders. And in such a grouping of sculptures, the centerpiece was a female figure holding to the center, the core of her being, her offspring, referred to as Gwandansu, an individual who embodies strength, courage, conviction, and the ability to accomplish great deeds. Now, the sculptor conveyed these ideas of Gwandansu through the scale of the figure, through elevating her on a seat, which is in actuality a throne, and through giving her certain attributes not associated with ordinary woman, namely the crowning headgear that she's wearing, which is a hunter's headdress, an attribute of male leadership. And here you can see this subject of Gwandansu as represented over and over again, each time differently by different individual artists. These are the focal point of what is essentially a theatrical display of sculptures that underscore the critical place of women at the core of society as the sustainers of life and the nurturers who oversee the critical farming of their communities, the literally producing the staples that their families depend on through agriculture, and also through bringing new life into their families and educating them and shaping them to become future leaders. And in this kind of a grouping, you find not only the mother and child, but other female protagonists. And these are all oriented to show deference and to complement the mother and child. For example, these two female figures are both carrying water on their heads. The one on the left you can see is a very early example that was cherished in a community for many centuries, very eroded. The one on the right of more recent vintage that still has the very crisp, sharp lines that Bamana sculptors are known for. Very naturalistic, full rounded figures. And this subject of a woman carrying a vessel of water on her head is a reference to the domestic responsibilities of women, collecting water to offer it as drinking water, critical to life, as well as for bathing and as a gesture of hospitality. Now, these kinds of sculptures were displayed a couple of times a year to be studied and discussed collectively by members of the community. And they were very much bringing values and ideals to life in this very, in the presence of these very vibrant sculptures. But I also wanted to share with you an art form that was special to Bamana women. The sculptures were carved by male blacksmiths, but women in Bamana communities were responsible for a flat two-dimensional art form known as mudcloth. And here we have a garment, which is actually a vest worn by a male hunter and under as a protective garment. And it is actually a tradition that many of you may be familiar with, known as mudcloth or bogolanfini, that is very famous from Mali. Bogolanfini literally translates as cloth made of mud. And in Bamana society, it's a special kind of textile dyed with both vegetable pigments and the earth itself that has special properties that make it able to absorb and deflect excess force. So you can see that it's kind of a form of armor that the hunter wears when he goes into the bush to into dangerous circumstances where he's vulnerable. And here on the left is a very classic example of a woman's wrapper made from bogolanfini. And this is actually worn as a lower garment. And you can see that a two-dimensional graphic language has been used, literally painted onto the surface by its female author. And these abstract designs are not simply decorative. They have specific symbolic meanings. This particular example is a composition referring to fertility, subsistence, and security. Works like this is an incredibly complex process, in, the ability to produce mud cloth. And so highly skilled female specialists gather the mud and mineral and vegetable pigments used to transform fabric into these dynamic visual statements that are invested with protective power. And the power of these designs was, as I mentioned before, one that was worn on the person of both female members of society and men. On the right is a famous form of Bamana altar, a boli, which is the kind of religious sculpture that was very much identified with the Segu Empire, and that was the target of jihadist conquerors of Segu, who felt that they could no longer tolerate these kinds of idolatrous practices at a time when Islam was becoming more and more of the major faith practiced in this region. And I just want to close with a very beautiful portrait of a woman that was taken in Senegal at the beginning of the 20th century, wearing beautiful gold jewelry of the kind that you see on the screen on the left. And this takes us full circle in terms of understanding the history of this region, because the reason that Arab traders began making this very challenging journey across the Sea of Sand, the Sahara, from the late 7th century on, was that they had heard that this region of West Africa was the source of immense wealth, specifically gold. And so they developed, along with their partners, the leaders of these mighty Sahelian states, a global network of exchange that brought gold out of what is present-day Mali, across the Sahara and all the way to Europe. We know that in the Middle Ages, 3/4 of the gold that was traded in Europe was originally mined in this region of Mali. And interestingly enough, the early Arab accounts talk about the glittering quartz that they engaged with at Kumbi Saleh and in ancient Mali. But archaeologists find very few examples of gold work that was created for local consumption. And we believe that one of the reasons for this is that gold was something that was continually reshaped in the cultures of the Sahel, that it wasn't something that you fashioned in one form and that you passed on that you journeyed into the afterlife with, but it was something that you passed on from generation to generation and reshaped it continually, like those adobe structures that the Great Mosque at Djenné is representative of. I think I'm going to stop now because we're almost at 4. And Andrea had asked for the opportunity for questions. We don't have much time. And I apologize that my speaking was a little bit choppier. I got a little bit distracted. But Andrea, do you want to turn things over to some questions?
Thank you very much, Alisa, and it is my apology for this distraction. It is you don't need to apologize. It is unfortunately some of our ladies are not able to mute yourself, and it is my apologies to on my side and on the side of the UNDWC. So ladies, if you are interested in asking the questions, please go ahead. I don't know. Is anybody interested to ask the question? Tina, we cannot hear you.
Andrea, can I begin? Alisa, thank you so much. This was, you took us through almost how many centuries of art? It's just mind-boggling. I wanted to ask you that you talked about the empires, the artwork coming around from 300 to 1200, Ghana, and then Mali from 1230 to 1600, and then Songhay from 1464, 1591, and then Segu up until 1861. Do we see a pattern of similar artwork that's just being formed and reformed or used, or images that are just consistent throughout? And a second question I have is, has this tradition of female artists working in textiles and the ceramics, you showed the mudwork pots and other medias, does this still continue?
I would say that pottery production and textile design continue to be very vibrant, contemporary forms of expression across the region. They are produced both for local consumption and for an international clientele. One of the most famous forms of African textiles that people wear in New York City is that of the mud cloth, incorporated in all kinds of contemporary fashion. So it really has a global following. It is one of the things that is important to keep in mind is that while there is continuity in terms of things like this, there's also significant change. And today, most people in the Western Sahel are, 90% of them are practice Islam. And so many of those forms of wood sculpture that were commissioned to be positioned on family altars no longer are being created for local consumption because people have moved on. And in those communities, the focal point of spiritual life today is a mosque. And one of the things that I found incredibly inspiring when I first began traveling in this part of the world to be studying its art history is to appreciate how beautifully sculptural those mosques are. They are really a very, very aesthetically beautiful blend of historical practices and contemporary faith. so that each community creates a mosque that is very much its own creative invention, and no two of them look anything alike, and they are made of this local soil, and I think that this is one of the most important focal points of contemporary culture in communities across the region today.
Thank you very much, Alisa. Interesting topic. And because I used to live in Africa, so my next question is, if I may, what challenges do women of Sahel face today? If you go back to Africa, what do you see in Africa? How, nowadays Africa looks for you after, so many years you have spent in Africa as a child. What do you think? What are the most kind of challenges, or what are the challenges of women in this part of Africa right now?
Well, I think that, the challenges in some senses are different from place to place. When I decided to organize the Sahel exhibition, I wanted to, it was a project that I developed 5 years ago, and I wanted to provide people with an understanding of what a rich history this region has, because in the news coverage of the Sahel, we hear only of the tragedies. And as Rekia, I'm sure, is very much like myself, devastated by, in the last 2 weeks, Niger has been the victim of some tragedies, loss of human life in communities, especially near the Mali border. And so, my hope was to emphasize for people that, despite all of the difficulties and challenges that we're confronted with today in the present moment, there is such a rich and powerful history behind this region that we can learn from in terms of having a better tomorrow. I think in the Sahel, I would not want to speak for others who know more, but obviously the need for girls to have access to education is critical in our modern day world. But in the Sahel, we have a situation where the climate change is impacting communities so severely. And obviously it's not the fault of people who live in this region, it's all of our responsibility that climate change has come. And so in order to be able to survive and have a better life, young people are leaving the region in huge numbers. And it's the mothers and the older women who are left behind having to run the families. And so much responsibility falls on their shoulders. And obviously, they were pillars of society before this current crisis of migration, but now they bear even greater responsibility. I see Gloria Starr has her hand raised.
Yes, my question is the types of transportation we had in those days, because they were very nomadic, am I
¿Qué
correct?
pasa?
And so what kind of
A ver,
animals?
déjame verte. Si te los estiras hacia abajo no te veo. Ven aquí.
Okay, so transportation,
They have what kind of animals, what kind of
so
that would interest me.
mules and also horses. Horses were incredibly valuable property owned by elites in the Sahel that actually were ferried across the Sahara Desert. And you actually, in the exhibition that we organized, a major image of leadership and male authority was that of the equestrian warrior. So horses actually had a very hard time surviving in this incredibly hot, dry environment. But mules were actually what people used to relay things within the Sahel. And obviously the camel is the creature that allows trans-Saharan trade to develop. It's often referred to as the tip of the desert. And the journey from Morocco to Niger, if you journey by camel from back in the 8th century to today is a journey of around 70 days.
Ladies, before we go ahead, I would like to ask you to mute yourself if you are not speaking, because there is probably some kind of echo on your side. So if you are not talking, please mute yourself. And when you want to ask the question, please just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Andrea, I have a question.
Betty, please.
Okay. Betty Robbins, Women for Women. I really want to thank Alisa for a wonderful program. I had read the New York Times review at the end of January, and for those who didn't see it, the review was fantastic, and Alisa received kudos, personally kudos in the review. But you talk with us about how many of these objects may have been damaged or destroyed purposefully at the time. But I think we'd also appreciate, or I would appreciate hearing how they've been rediscovered. Has it been systematic or accidental or both?
I think that most of the works that I showed you are works that have been scientifically excavated by archaeologists, and as part of the research to recover more insight into developments that were unfolding in the region. I mean, one of the interesting things about the history of this region is that we have written accounts of observations from the 8th century on, but from the 8th century to around the 15th century, most of these written sources are by outsiders who are visiting, who are describing their journeys to the region. In the 16th century, we start to have texts by great scholars from cities like Timbuktu that are locally produced, that are histories. But for the many centuries before that, the material culture that archaeologists uncover is a means to tell a inside story about what was happening in terms of the events that were unfolding. And I mean, I would say that my colleagues who are leading archaeologists, both American and Malian and Nigerian and Senegalese who are working in this region, they feel that they've only really excavated a small fraction of the sites that are going to give us more richer understanding of events. But archaeology in this area is actually relatively young. It began only in, serious scientific excavating really began in the 70s in this region. Before that, you had a lot of French colonial officials basically uprooting artifacts without documenting them properly. And so now we have a whole school of contemporary archaeologists from the region, as well as their colleagues from the US who have within only a generation really transformed our understanding of archaeology in this area. But it's actually quite, a formidable task. There are so many sites that still need to be explored. And there's a lot of challenges to being able to excavate in the region. The digs that were so important in Mali can no longer happen because there is so much instability right now. So a lot of work needs to be done, and hopefully will resume at some point in the near future when we're able to have a situation which is more manageable for that kind of research. For that reason, actually, Senegal has become the real center for archaeology today, because people who used to work at sites in Mali and in Niger have shifted their focus because they're better able to not have security problems for the moment.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Alisa.
Thanks for that question.
Next question. I would like to have my personal question, if you don't mind, because I know you live in Africa, when exactly have you started kind of be interested into archaeology, and I know that African life during your childhood definitely affected you a lot, but this is quite extraordinary type of art. So can you please just tell us your story about how everything started, in your life?
Well, as you mentioned, and as Tina mentioned in the beginning, because my father was an American diplomat and was mostly involved in cultural and educational exchange, everywhere we lived, we had the great privilege of getting to know the artists, the writers, the poets, the creative people everywhere that we moved. And that was incredibly inspirational to me as a young person. My father loved contemporary African art. He had great friendships with living artists that he met in places ranging from Lagos to Dakar. And so that was kind of a natural part of my development and my learning about contemporary art. And I, as an undergraduate at the University of Virginia, I was studying in a university where archaeology was a very important part of the life of the university. And but we didn't have courses on African archaeology, and it wasn't really included in the survey courses that were offered. And so I wanted to learn more about the history. I had been exposed to the contemporary realities, which I was very interested in, but I wanted to learn about what had happened before. And so I actually started doing internships in museums that had African art. I applied to a graduate program that taught African art history. And I combined doing that with continuing to travel to the region to spend time with my family. And I think that, one of the challenges for me as a curator of African art is that I work on such a vast region of the world, so many different sub-Saharan countries, that it's really, it's impossible to generalize about culture from one place to the next. Each of the places that I study is special and different. And for me, understanding the different histories of each of these places and their contemporary realities is an ongoing learning experience. Before COVID, I was constantly traveling to the region to expand my awareness, to learn more. And it's really, it's a vast area with incredible richness culturally that is impossible to do justice to.
Exactly, I agree completely with you. You know, my experience with Africa is completely the same. And once you come to Africa, you fall in love with Africa, right? That's my opinion. I do. And I wish you, of course, if COVID is over and you can travel to Africa again soon. Tina, please.
Alisa, before you end, Alisa, before you end, can you tell us about the renovations? I know they're starting in June.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, Tina, because I want to share one final image with you that I had put in my PowerPoint, which is of our plans for the Africa galleries that we're working on. And let me see here. So just want you to be aware that about 6 years ago, we started to plan a renovation of the entire Michael C. Rockefeller wing. For those of you who aren't that familiar with our wing of the museum, it opened to the public as a brand new part of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1982. Before 1982, African art had not been exhibited or collected by the Metropolitan. So unlike a lot of these discussions about European institutions that have colonial collections, we did not have a collection. And so having Africa presented in terms of its creative legacy is a relatively recent thing at our museum. But the galleries that were created in 1982 are a generation old. And once they opened to the public, there was such an explosion of research and really big leaps in our understanding of the cultures, the cultural traditions that are represented in our galleries, that we really felt like we needed to embark on a pretty significant update of these spaces. And so we've been involved with architects on a plan to redesign these spaces that we're very excited about. And the current galleries are going to be dismantled starting in July. And then we're going to be reopening them in 2024. So it's actually going to take us several years to dismantle and transform the space and re-present the works. But here you see an approximate rendering. This is actually even a little bit out of date of the first Africa gallery as we've redesigned it. And you can see in the foreground a series of these monumental Bamana figures like the ones that I showed you in our presentation earlier. These are examples in the Metropolitan's collection that were given to the museum by Nelson Rockefeller in the 1980s. And so we're introducing a lot of important changes into the new galleries. And I hope that, I very much look forward to discussing these with you on future occasions and welcoming you to the new galleries when they're ready in 2024.
Yeah, we are ready all the time, but if we are still here, that's the question. I would like to give floor to Rakia. She would like to ask something. Rakia?
Rakia?
You're still on mute, Rakia.
Rakia, you need to unmute yourself. Yes, now.
Okay, so I wanted to thank, first of all, Alisa for the introduction she's having in Africa, and especially on the art and the culture. And I'm thanking also the organization, my English is not that good, so I'm trying. the organizer of this meeting. I just come back I travel, I just come in. So I'm trying to the best to contribute to this because it's concerned Africa. I'm so glad, and it's concerned Niger, that is my country. So I wanted to make a little presentation of my country so people would know where it is located in the Sahel. So Niger is located in West Africa. It has 23.3 million people. And we have a border with Libya and Algeria, Nigeria, Chad, Burkina Faso, and Benin. And the language we are speaking is French, is a French-speaking country. So most of the time, people confuse Niger and Nigeria. Niger is a French-speaking country, and Nigeria is an English-speaking country. So it's two different countries. I wanted to, we have a superficie of 1,267 kilometers. So it's a very, very big country, but the 2/3 of this country is desert. So most of the people are at the west side or the west side of the country. What I wanted to add on the presentation of Dr. Alisa is that the biggest, the tallest mosque in the world that has been made with mud brick, with Banco, is located in Niger, and it's in Agadez. Agadez is at the border of Libya and Mali. So this mosque was made around the beginning of the earlier 50th century, and is now the UNESCO World Heritage Center. So it's the world's tallest mosque made with mud brick in the world. Actually, it's important to notice about what Dr. Alisa is saying, that in Niger now we are facing a lot of problems that lead with young girls' education, because in Niger we have the highest rates of fertility. We have like 7 kids for every woman. Did I say it right?
7.
Yeah, we have like 7 kids for everyone, for every woman. So it's really high. And the population is young, because like half of the population is under 25 years old. Okay, we're facing education of the young girls because the parents were not educated. So if they have a young girl at home, she helped to keep the house, and she can also like help to earn money so they can take care of the family. And sometimes the girls are married young because it's the way they think things should be. Okay, we're having problem with water, because it's in Sahel. The 2/3 of the country is desert. So in some places, women are facing really difficulties to get water, because they have to walk far away, to get the water. Sometimes, you can walk 2 hours, or so. There is really places that needs to be maybe help, or to get water.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot. The country is doing a lot about family planning, to reduce the rate of kids per woman. But it will take long, because it's we have to work on the mentality. We have to work it leads with a lot of things, with poverty, with a lot of things going on. And I don't want to stay long. We are facing now, like Dr. Alisa said, insecurity in the east, at the border of Libya and Algeria, and at the west side, at the border of Mali, Burkina Faso. So we are having a lot of people that's moving from those places to the capital, or to the safest place that they can go. So the kids on those places, they can't go to school, because sometimes the schools are the target, and sometimes the young girls are the targets. So it's really a problem that we are facing now. I didn't get the time to organize all my idea, because I didn't know early about the meeting. I just come from a traveling from, so it's what I can share with you. Thank you, everyone.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Ina, you wanted to say something? Oh,
I wanted to just
to comment something.
before you end, Andrea, I just wanted to thank you, Rakia, for joining us today. She is so kind. She wasn't feeling well, and she joined us, and for telling us we go from art bringing light to problems of today, which is sometimes a good segue into to going forward and thinking about what is important and what to preserve and how well to do it, and how important it is to preserve our artwork so that we can help countries to just reflect on history and talk about the peaceful transition of 7 centuries or 17 centuries of continuous indigenous life with immigration adding to and supporting local artists and freedom fighters and educationalists. And I think more power to our leaders and to art leaders like Alisa, who are bringing these wonderful things to life and preserving them and helping our own countries to preserve our treasures and to be able to showcase them around the world. I'd like to just briefly thank Cecilia Omele Kelapile from Botswana for joining us today, and Sahar from Egypt, and Yamile Roche from Cabo Verde, and my predecessor from the UNDWC board, Nellie Ameo, who joined us from Washington, DC. Please, Andrea, for the last final words, and very warm thank you, Alisa, to your assistant, Lisa, who has just been so wonderful with communication and sharing ideas, and for you to join us today as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tina. I just would like to thank, first of all, Rekia for sharing, of course, those informations about your country. And I think we all understand, we cannot really see it on our own eyes, but I think, everybody who is connected to the United Nations probably understands what's happening and how the climate change is affecting most parts of Africa, and how this issue is affecting, of course, lives of women in this part of Africa. And we will really keep our eyes on your country when we organize our United Nations International Bazaar next time, and we will be definitely more than happy to help, of course, to your country with some kind of financial support, if we can collect some kind of financial support from organizing our International Bazaar. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
At this moment, I would like to, of course, thank to our wonderful speaker, Alisa LaGamma. It was a wonderful presentation about that part of Africa, which is probably unknown to majority of us. Of course, I'm not talking about African ladies, but it is definitely some hidden treasure on the earth. And I really encourage everybody who is attending and who has not been to Africa to really travel to Africa and to see it on your own eyes. At this moment, on behalf of the United Nations Delegation Women's Club Executive Board, I would like to virtually present to Alisa this kind of apple, which we present to our speakers. At the same time, of course, I promise that this apple, UNDWC apple, will be delivered to you personally when we meet in person in Metropolitan Museum. I wish you wonderful future, and this renovation of the African wing or the Rockefeller wing to be really successful. And of course, you will keep an eye on this renovation. So we wish you all the best. And of course, just use your knowledge and use your skills to present it for future New Yorkers and future diplomatic spouses as beautifully as possible. And of course, I would like to thank and also virtually present this apple of the UNDWC to our host of today, Tina Conjuls, the spouse of the permanent representative of Republic of Mauritius. and we are really thankful for arranging this wonderful event. Next time, I just would like to invite you to join us in April after the break, when we will organize our next April Tea Party, which will be organized by the Mission of Kyrgyzstan in the middle of April. We will, of course, confirm what is the date. And in the conclusion, of course, I would like to wish all of you a wonderful and peaceful and healthy Easter, and healthy and peaceful Passover to our, of course, members from Women for Women community. And I hope we will meet next time in good health and everybody will be vaccinated and we will live more safer this time. And I hope we will meet in person with Alisa in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So thank you very much for your attention. And once again, big thank you to both Tina and Alisa for this wonderful event and the presentation, of course, which I can speak hopefully for everybody was wonderfully prepared, and it took us really to parts of the earth which is uncovered for us.